So on Sunday, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis dropped out of the presidential race, and my initial reaction to that was, ha ha, get fucked, loser, good fucking riddance. And well, my feelings are pretty much the same, but what I want to talk about in this video is how pathetic Ron DeSantis' campaign was. He bought into his own hype and pulled the trigger way too quickly. Now, I'll be honest, I bought into the DeSantis hype myself. Rewinding back to the 2022 midterms, a lot of Trump-endorsed candidates flopped. Meanwhile, DeSantis completely crushed it in Florida. And it really seemed like at the time, people were really tired of Trump's rhetoric. He was still going on and on about the 2020 election and how it was supposedly stolen from him. And that's really all Trump had to bring to the table. Joe Biden cheated. I really won 2020. Vote for me in 2024 to restore democracy. And yes, of course, this resonates with the craziest of crazies in his voter base, but most of the people in this country view it as incessant whining, akin to a petulant little child throwing a tantrum because they didn't get what they wanted. And whining about the 2020 election is still mostly what he has to bring to the table, but the only difference now is he has 91 criminal charges on his ass, and if he's found guilty on even some of these charges, there is a decent possibility he will be barred from holding office. So therefore, he could use these charges as ammo to say, see, they don't want you to have a choice. They don't want me to be president because they view me as a threat. And shit like that riles his base up because a Trump supporter loves nothing more than feeling like they're persecuted. And so ever since the series of legal troubles began, there has been newfound momentum behind Trump that DeSantis simply couldn't keep up with. The initial appeal of a DeSantis campaign in 2022 and early 2023 was that he was like Trump, but more refined and also younger. That landed back then because it seemed like there was a noticeable split in the Republican Party. There were the Trump crazies, of course, who were ride or die with Trump, but then there were also other people who lived just a smidgen closer to reality and were like, okay, all of this talk about how the 2020 election was stolen is not a winning issue. And if Trump himself can't move on, then maybe we have to move on from Trump. And this DeSantis guy is looking pretty promising. But the landscape is very different now. Again, Trump's momentum is bigger than ever. And honestly, why would a Trump voter settle for someone who's like Trump when they could just vote for Trump himself? Iowa was the real test because your average person who lives in Iowa is a decrepit 75-year-old white conservative. So ideally, Ron DeSantis is prime base. But who did they overwhelmingly vote for instead? Donald Trump. DeSantis still made it in second, but Trump won 51% of the vote, whereas DeSantis won 21% of the vote. A 30% difference. I thought for sure he would hold out until after New Hampshire, but his chances in New Hampshire were looking even more dismal. Nikki Haley even was leading him in polls in New Hampshire, so I guess to save himself from even further embarrassment, he pulled out before New Hampshire. And when he dropped out, he endorsed Trump, which I find so fucking hilarious. I mean, people have been saying that this isn't surprising whatsoever, because most of DeSantis' voter base will probably just flock back to Trump anyway. But the reason I find comedy in this is because, like I said, a big part of Ron DeSantis' branding during the campaign trail and before his campaign trail was that he is the new Trump. He is the new face of the Republican Party and the future of the Republican Party. But really, what did DeSantis have to bring to the table? I'm anti-woke, look at my epic legal battle against Disney, which I'm totally getting my ass handed to me in, but ignore that. It's the fact that I picked this fight to begin with is what matters. And I've seen his debate performances now. I didn't watch all of the debates in full because I value my sanity, and I've also watched some clips from his campaign speeches, and he still crows on and on about how he opposed COVID restrictions and Fauci. One, Fauci is retired now, so no one gives a fuck about him anymore, and two, how many people in the general public even still give a fuck about COVID? Most people at this point have decided to just throw their hands up in the air and treat COVID like it's just another flu, and I'm not saying that's necessarily a good thing, but what I am saying is all of this talk about opposing COVID restrictions and vaccine and mask mandates don't really land with the public anymore because it's not 2020 and 2021 anymore. He also branded himself as the tough on immigration guy. I think he even said at one point suspected cartel members would be shot on sight or something like that. But Trump's initial appeal was his policy regarding immigration and the border, so how exactly are you differentiating yourself from Trump in that regard? DeSantis' campaign revolved around either irrelevant bullshit or issues he is no different than Trump on, and since Trump is running in this election cycle, what is the point in hopping off the Trump train to vote for DeSantis instead? I think this campaign totally blew DeSantis' credibility among Republican voters, because prior to this campaign, he was seen as a rising star and the future of the Republican Party. Had he waited until 2028 to run a presidential campaign, he might have had a much better shot. This goes back to what I said at the beginning of this video. He pulled the trigger way too early and bought into his own hype. All of this talk about him being the future of the party got into his head, and he thought for sure he could take down the guy the entire party at this point has coalesced around. And his winning strategy was just be exactly like that guy, but just sprinkle in a little bit more talk about the evil woke agenda, because that's totally a winning issue with voters. It's amazing how this campaign, from the very second it began, was a huge failure. I mean, remember that extremely embarrassing Twitter space where DeSantis announced his campaign, and for the first, 25 minutes, he couldn't even speak because Twitter was glitching out? Holy shit, that was one of the funniest things I've ever experienced. And now it's down to Trump and Nikki Haley, and I don't think Nikki Haley has a shot in hell unless she holds out until if or when Trump is blocked from being able to become president, or Trump just suddenly dies, which is also a possibility as well. I mean, have you seen his recent speeches? Holy shit. I would be shocked if Nikki Haley somehow got the nomination without either of those two scenarios happening. But anyway, DeSatan is finally out. He is now seen as a giant laughingstock, so hopefully now he will just fade into irrelevancy. That's all I have to say. Bye-bye.